I'm your host, Dr. Joe Dispenza. Is it possible that your brain has been conditioned and habituated by you to view your outer reality in a very limited way? When you focus your attention on a daily basis in this three-dimensional reality, your brain naturally narrows its focus on everything material. As you learned in the last episode, this is called a convergent focus, and it's the hormones of stress that amplify this process. Is it possible there are other ways to focus your attention to break the habit of how you see the world? And can you make your brain begin to work differently? And in the previous episode, we went into great detail on the difference between survival and creation. In this episode, we're going to identify in a very simple way the different types of brainwaves to show you the skill of being able to consciously control your own brainwaves. Let's start by understanding the different types of brainwaves. When neurons fire in your brain, they emit electromagnetic frequencies. And science has been able to capture those frequencies by using a technology called Electroencephalographic readings, or EEG readings. We put on a cap on a person's head, and there's these little electrodes. And we use a gel that begins to couple the surface of that electrode to the scalp. And we hook up those electrodes to a computer that begins to measure the different frequencies in different compartments in different regions in the brain. So then let's talk about the different brainwaves. The first type of brainwave is called beta brainwaves. Think about your brain as an organ that begins to create meaning and coherence in order between what's going on in your outer world and what's going on in your inner world. Now, when you're conscious and you're awake and your attention is on your outer environment and you're aware of your body in space and time, your brain has to gather and begin to integrate all the different information through those 5 different sensory pathways. Everything you're listening to and hearing, everything you're seeing, everything you're feeling, everything you're smelling, all of that information has to be integrated by the brain. And when the brain is active and conscious and you're aware, your brainwaves go into what's called beta brainwave patterns. Now, think about beta brainwave patterns as your attention primarily on your outer environment. So then we've talked about the principle of meditation and beginning to regulate and change your brainwaves. So is it possible then that you can begin to change your brainwaves from beta brainwaves to alpha brainwaves? Well, back in the 60s and the 70s, when there was a lot of research done on biofeedback, there were researchers at Princeton University that spent an enormous amount of time trying to change their brainwaves. And over again, they were unable to change their brainwave patterns, no matter what they did. Whether they chanted, whether they had positive affirmations, whether they burned incense, they did all of these different types of things, relaxing their body. Nothing actually changed their brainwaves until one researcher was so tired that he finally said, "I give up." And the moment he surrendered and he let go and he gave up, he watched his brain right before his eyes move from beta brainwave patterns to alpha brainwave patterns. Think of alpha when your inner world starts becoming more real than your outer world. Now, most people, when they're functioning in beta brainwave patterns, they naturally shift to alpha brainwave patterns. The brain pauses for a moment and you begin to think about what you're thinking about. And in fact, when I do lectures around the world and I'm watching people pay attention, they're relaxed, their attention is on their outer environment, they're exposed to the information that I'm teaching them, then all of a sudden they stop and they pause and they go like this. And when they stop and they pause, all of a sudden they're making their inner world more real than the outer world, and they freeze that image in their brain, and the brain begins to consolidate it neurologically. So when you get into the meditative process, and you sit your body down, and it's not eating, it's not smelling, it's not tasting, it's not feeling, it's not experiencing, you're not seeing, you're not hearing. Of course, now you're starting to disconnect from your outer environment, and now your inner world starts becoming more real than your outer world. And in that state, brain waves in your thinking brain begin to slow down. And when that occurs, you move into alpha brainwave patterns. And alpha brainwave patterns are slower brainwave patterns. Now, what's the significance of this? When you begin to move into alpha from beta, you are beginning to move beyond your analytical mind. And now you're entering the operating system where all those subconscious programs, habits, and behaviors exist. So then in alpha, we tend to no longer hear the voice in our head that's talking to us. And all of a sudden, we start to see in pictures and images. Think of alpha as the imaginary state. Another way to think of alpha is when you're driving down the freeway in your car. Your brain is fixed in a state of trance. You're in that state of alpha. You have no idea how long you've been driving. You have no idea who's been driving the car. You have no attention on anything in your outer world. You're imaging pictures in your mind. And you have to move into alpha in order to do that. There's another brainwave state called theta brainwave state. This is a hypnotic state. This is a state of heightened suggestibility. Suggestibility is your ability to accept, believe, and surrender to information without any analysis. So in theta, it's a very slow brainwave state. And in a sense, the body is resting and semi-asleep, and you're awake. Or better said, you are conscious in your subconscious mind. When a person moves into theta, lights are out in the part of the brain that connects you to everything known or familiar in your life. The seat of the identity, the conscious mind, the personality now has been suppressed. And now consciousness or awareness is moving out of the neocortex, and it's beginning to move into the subconscious centers of the brain. Now the next state is called delta brainwave states. And in delta, think about delta as restorative sleep. This is when your body is in a catatonic state and it's completely asleep, and now there's very little activity in your conscious mind. The last state is called gamma brainwave patterns. Now, you would think that gamma is a faster frequency than beta, and in a sense it is. But now, when you live by the hormones of stress, the arousal of those stress hormones drives the brain not into just a normal beta state, but a high beta state. And if you look at gamma, there's an arousal that's taking place in the brain. But the arousal is not coming from some danger, some threat, or some condition in your outer environment that's evoking the stress hormones and causing emotions like aggression or fear or sadness to occur. In gamma, there's an arousal within the body. Energy from the body begins to move up into the brain. And when that happens, the brain moves into a superconscious or super aware state. So think about gamma as a super aroused, super conscious, super aware state where your inner world tends to become more real than your outer world. I want you to just see the difference between high beta brainwave patterns and gamma brainwave patterns. You can see that the waves of gamma tend to be more compressed and the frequency tends to be a little bit faster. Now, look at the left-hand side of this graph. You see the numbers going from 0 all the way up to 100. So delta brainwaves tend to be at a frequency that's very slow in the neocortex, 0.5 to 4 cycles per second. Theta brainwaves tend to be a little bit faster. They're 4 to 8 cycles per second. And as we keep increasing frequencies, you can see that alpha brainwave patterns are about 8 to 13 cycles per second. Now, in low-level beta, you can see low-level beta is about 13 to 15 cycles per second. Mid-range beta is about 16 to 22 cycles per second. Now, let's talk about this before we go any further. Low-level beta is a healthy brainwave state. In fact, when you're learning, you should be in low-level beta. Why? Because there's no threat, there's no danger, it's the perfect time to learn. But if a professor came out while you were learning and said, there's going to be a quiz at the end of this teaching session, and you have to pass the quiz in order for you to pass the course, all of a sudden, the light bulb in your brain would get a little bit brighter, and it would put more energy in there, and you would get more awake or more aroused. When you're getting ready to do a lecture or getting ready to do a speech, this kind of stress, called eustress or good stress, gives you a little bit more energy to be able to navigate in your three-dimensional reality, and the brain begins to perk up a little bit. Now take a look at high-level beta. It's 22 to 50 cycles per second. And high-level beta is more than 2 to 3 times higher than low-level beta. And in high-level beta, this is when your brain is stuck in emergency mode. And think about high beta like driving your sports car on the freeway in first gear. It's good for the short term, but once a person gets stuck in this high beta state, now they're living in severe anxiety, severe depression. They're in a state where their brain is always aroused, and they need something outside of them to begin to sedate the body so they can begin to relax. And this is a problem because living in high beta is the arousal of the stress hormones. And as we begin to shift our attention from one person to another thing, to another place, to another time, the arousal of the brain because of those stress hormones moving into a very high beta state not only causes the high beta to happen, but it causes the brain to begin to function very incoherently. And people tend to narrow their focus on the danger. And now they're enslaved to the laws of Newtonian physics, where they have to rush to try to get things to happen in their life. And for a lot of people, their brains are stuck in high beta. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Dispenza.